I never thought I would be the guy writing one of these stories, pouring my soul out to a bunch of strangers on the internet. But I guess life has a funny, twisted way of bringing you to your knees when you least expect it. My name is Mark. I'm 32. I live in a quiet, tree-lined suburb just outside of Chicago. And until about 6 months ago, I thought I had everything completely figured out. I had a great job in logistics management, a beautiful 3-bedroom house with a wraparound porch, and most importantly, I had Chloe. Chloe was my high school sweetheart, the girl I had loved since I was 17 years old. We had been married for 4 years, and our relationship was the kind of rock-solid foundation that everyone around us envied. We didn't really fight, we shared the same group of friends, and we were actively talking about starting a family. She was a graphic designer, fiercely creative, fiercely loyal, or so I thought, and the absolute center of my universe. Then there was Justin. Justin had been my best friend since our freshman year at Ohio State. We were roommates in college, drank too many cheap beers together, helped each other through awful breakups, and eventually he followed me out to Illinois when he got a job in tech sales. Justin was the charismatic, loud, life-of-the-party type of guy. Where I was structured, analytical, and cautious, Justin was impulsive, charming, and always living in the moment. He was the brother I never had. Chloe loved him too, though in a completely platonic, familial way, or at least that's what she always told me. Whenever Justin had a rough patch with a girlfriend or blew through his savings on some stupid investment, he knew our door was always open. We were a trio. We did Friday night barbecues in the backyard, went on camping trips in Wisconsin, and celebrated every major milestone together. We were family. But around the beginning of last year, Justin's life completely unraveled. He got laid off from his sales firm after a massive corporate restructuring, and within 3 months, his landlord refused to renew his lease because the building was being converted into luxury condos. He was stressed, bleeding through his savings, and looking completely defeated. I remember the night he called me from the parking lot of a local diner, sounding closer to tears than I had ever heard him. I didn't even hesitate. I looked across the living room at Chloe, who was curled up on the sofa reading a book, and I told Justin to pack his bags and come over. Chloe didn't mind at all. In fact, she was the one who suggested he stay in our finished basement or take the living room couch until he found a permanent place. She said it was our duty to help him get back on his feet. I felt so incredibly lucky to have a wife who was that deeply compassionate. The first few weeks were actually great. It felt like a throwback to our college days, just with a much nicer house and better food. Justin would have dinner waiting for us when we got home from work, or he'd help me mow the lawn on the weekends. He was actively sending out resumes every single day, sitting at our kitchen island with his laptop, drinking coffee, and talking to Chloe about design projects while I was at the office. I was working late quite a bit during that period because my company was launching a new regional distribution center, which meant 60-hour work weeks for me. I felt guilty about leaving Chloe alone so much, but knowing Justin was there to keep her company, to watch movies with her, or to grab takeout so she didn't have to cook alone, gave me a massive sense of relief. I trusted them both, implicitly. I trusted them more than I trusted myself. But looking back now, with the agonizing clarity of hindsight, that's exactly when the subtle shifts started happening. The little things you don't notice because you're too blinded by love and routine. I started noticing that whenever I would walk into the kitchen, their conversations would suddenly lull, shifting into a different, more casual topic. It wasn't an abrupt, awkward silence, but a smooth, practiced transition that felt just slightly off. I noticed how Justin started dressing a bit better around the house, wearing clean shirts instead of his usual ragged gray sweatpants. I noticed how Chloe started laughing a little louder at his jokes, or how she would instantly defend him if I made a passing comment about how he needed to hurry up and find a job. She told me I was being too hard on him, that he was going through a clinical depression, and that he needed our unconditional support. I felt like an asshole for even thinking otherwise, so I pushed the unease deep down into my chest and ignored it. The real shift occurred around month 3 of his stay. I noticed Chloe was becoming increasingly distant with me physically. We went from having a healthy, affectionate marriage to barely touching. Every time I reached for her at night, she had a headache, or she was too stressed about a client deadline, or she was just completely exhausted. Yet during the day, she seemed to have endless energy. She and Justin started going on morning runs together. They would wake up at 6, before I even had my first cup of coffee, and head out into the foggy suburban streets. They said it was a good way for Justin to clear his head and for Chloe to stay in shape. Again, it made sense on paper. They were just two people I loved, bonding and staying healthy. Why would I look at that and see a nightmare? Then came the second week of October. It was a Tuesday, and my boss called an emergency meeting at our downtown office. We had a massive shipping crisis with one of our major automotive clients, and it required a team of us to fly down to the regional hub in St. Louis to oversee the operations directly. I was supposed to be gone for 4 full days. I called Chloe from the airport, apologizing profusely for the sudden trip. She sounded incredibly understanding, almost surprisingly relaxed about it. She told me not to worry, to focus on my work, and that she and Justin would hold down the fort. I remember sitting in my hotel room in St. Louis that Wednesday night, looking at a photo of Chloe on my nightstand, feeling this overwhelming wave of gratitude for my life. I had a wife who didn't nag me about my career, and a best friend who was looking out for her while I was away. I felt like the luckiest man alive. By Thursday afternoon, our team managed to resolve the logistics issue, a full 24 hours ahead of schedule. The client was thrilled, the tension dissipated, and my boss told us we could head out early and take Friday off as a reward for the grueling hours we had put in. I was ecstatic. I didn't even bother calling Chloe to tell her I was coming home early. I wanted to surprise her. I imagined walking through the front door, pulling her into my arms, taking her out to that upscale Italian restaurant downtown she had been dying to try, and finally having a night completely to ourselves. I booked the earliest flight back to O'Hare, caught a rideshare home, and arrived in our neighborhood just as the streetlights were flickering on, around 8:30 in the evening. The house was dark when the Uber pulled up to the curb. The only illumination came from the faint, warm glow of the television upstairs in our master bedroom. Justin's car was parked in the driveway, and Chloe's SUV was in its usual spot. I smiled to myself, thinking they were probably just hanging out, watching a movie, or that Chloe was already unwinding for the night. I walked up the porch steps, my heart beating with excitement, and quietly unlocked the front door. The house was dead silent, save for the muffled, rhythmic bass of the TV upstairs. I set my suitcase down gently on the hardwood floor of the entryway, making sure not to make a sound. I took off my shoes, stepping out of my corporate clothes, mentally preparing to yell surprise as I walked up the stairs. But as I stepped closer to the staircase, a strange, suffocating feeling washed over me. The air in the house felt heavy, charged with an energy that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I don't know how to explain it, but intuition is a terrifying thing. Your brain might be completely in the dark, but your soul always knows when a bomb is about to drop. I walked up the carpeted steps, completely silent, the muffled sounds from our bedroom growing louder with each step. It wasn't the sound of a movie. It was the unmistakable, devastating sound of intimacy. My breath caught in my throat. My entire body turned to ice. I stood on the top landing, staring at the door of my own master bedroom, which was cracked open just an inch, letting a sliver of light cut through the dark hallway. Through that tiny sliver, my entire world, everything I had built, everything I believed in, was utterly shattered. I stood there in the suffocating darkness of the hallway, my hand gripping the wooden banister so tightly my knuckles turned white. The world around me seemed to decelerate into a sickening, slow-motion nightmare. The muffled sounds bleeding through the crack in our bedroom door were undeniable, a rhythmic, agonizing soundtrack that tore through my chest and ripped my heart straight out. For a fraction of a second, my brain tried to protect me. It tried to invent some absurd, impossible explanation, because accepting the reality meant my entire life was a lie. But the human mind can only deny the truth for so long when it's staring you right in the face. I took one agonizing step forward, my bare feet sinking into the carpet, making absolutely no sound. I reached out, my fingers trembling violently, and pushed the door open just a few more inches. The view that met my eyes will be burned into my retinas until the day I die. There, in the bed I bought, under the sheets we picked out together, was Chloe. And pressed against her was Justin, my best friend, my brother, the man I had taken in, fed, and protected when he had nowhere else to go. They were completely lost in each other, entirely oblivious to the fact that the man whose life they were systematically destroying was standing less than 10 feet away. The betrayal didn't just feel like an emotional blow. It felt physical. It felt like someone had taken a baseball bat to my ribs, knocking every single lungful of air out of me. I couldn't breathe. My vision began to blur at the edges, tunneling down until all I could see were the two people I trusted most in the world betraying me in the most visceral way possible. I watched Chloe's face, a face I had kissed every morning for years, and saw an expression of pure, unadulterated passion that she hadn't shown me in months. The headaches, the exhaustion, the client deadlines, it all flashed through my mind in a split second. It was all a calculated, pathetic lie to keep me away from her so she could do this. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been 10 seconds, or it could have been 10 minutes. Time loses all meaning when your reality collapses. A volatile mix of pure, murderous rage and profound, hollow despair began to boil in my stomach. Part of me wanted to burst through the door, tear Justin off my bed, and use my bare hands to destroy him. Another part of me just wanted to curl up on the hallway floor and cry until my lungs gave out. But as the initial shock began to crystallize into a cold, hard anger, a strange, eerie calm washed over me. I realized that if I confronted them right then and there, it would dissolve into screaming, denials, excuses, and a chaotic mess. I didn't want excuses. I wanted them to know exactly how thoroughly they had ruined everything. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it, but I forced my fingers to steady. I unlocked the screen, opened the camera app, and switched it to video mode. I raised the phone, aiming it through the crack in the door, and pressed record. I captured everything. I captured the definitive, undeniable proof of their treachery. I wanted evidence. I wanted something that no amount of gaslighting, no tears, and no spin doctoring from Chloe could ever erase. I recorded them for about 30 seconds, every tick of the clock feeling like a drop of acid on my soul. Once I had the video, I hit stop and saved it. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. Then I took a deep, shuddering breath, reached out, and gripped the doorknob. I didn't knock, I didn't yell, I just pushed the door wide open, letting it hit the interior wall with a sharp, heavy thud that echoed through the quiet house. The reaction was instantaneous. Justin scrambled backwards so fast he nearly fell off the far side of the mattress, his eyes widening in absolute, paralyzing terror as he looked at me. Chloe gasped, a sharp, choked sound escaping her throat as she desperately pulled the duvet up to her chin, her face instantly draining of all color. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody said a word. The only sound was the hum of the television and the heavy, ragged breathing of two people who had just been caught in the ultimate sin. "Mark," Chloe finally choked out, her voice trembling, cracking under the weight of her panic. "Mark, oh my God, it's not what it looks like. Please let me explain." It was the most cliché, insulting sentence she could have possibly uttered. "It's not what it looks like." I looked at her, staring into the eyes of the woman I had loved for over a decade, and I felt absolutely nothing but a profound, chilling disgust. She looked like a stranger to me. The girl I married was gone, replaced by a liar who had brought filth into our sanctuary. "Don't," I said. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was incredibly quiet, hollow, and devoid of any warmth or emotion. It was the voice of a man who had completely checked out. "Don't say another word, Chloe. If you speak, I swear to God I will lose my mind." Justin was sitting on the edge of the bed now, his hands in his hands, staring at the floor. He couldn't even look me in the eye. "Man, I am so sorry," he muttered, his voice muffled, sounding pathetic and small. "I'm so sorry, Mark. It just happened. We didn't mean to." Hearing him speak, hearing the voice of my best friend try to rationalize taking my wife in my own home, broke something inside me. The cold calm shattered, and the rage surged back to the surface. I walked over to Justin's side of the bed, grabbing him by the shoulder and ripping him to his feet. He didn't fight back. He just stood there, completely defenseless, looking at me with a mix of guilt and fear. "Get out," I whispered, my face inches from his. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, the scent of my own expensive whiskey that I had bought. Get out of my house right now. If you are not gone in 5 minutes, Justin, I am going to make sure you leave in an ambulance. Do you understand me? He didn't argue. He picked up his clothes from the floor, his hands shaking violently as he scrambled to put them on. He didn't look at Chloe, and he didn't look at me again. He grabbed his keys, his phone, and practically ran out of the bedroom, his bare feet pounding down the stairs. A few seconds later, I heard the heavy slam of the front door, followed by the roar of his car engine igniting in the driveway, tires screeching as he fled into the night. Then, it was just me and Chloe. The silence that filled the bedroom was heavier than any silence I had ever experienced. She was crying now, tears streaming down her pale face, sobbing into her hands, still clutching the blanket tightly against her chest. She looked small, miserable, and completely broken.
But I didn't feel an ounce of pity. "Mark, please," she sobbed, looking up at me, her eyes red and desperate. "Please talk to me. Scream at me. Hit something. Just don't look at me like that. Please. We can fix this. It was a mistake. An awful, terrible mistake. I love you. I only love you." I walked over to the edge of the bed, standing over her. I looked down at the woman who had been my entire world, and I felt a terrifying wave of finality wash over me. "You don't love me, Chloe," I said, my voice deadpan, completely flat. "Because you don't do this to someone you love. You didn't just break our marriage, you destroyed my entire life. You took the one person I thought had my back, and you used him to stab me in mine." "It was just this once, I swear," she lied, her voice rising in a panicked pitch. "It just happened tonight because we were lonely and drinking, and we made a horrible mistake. It's never happened before, Mark, I swear on my life." I pulled my phone out of my pocket, unlocked it, and held the screen right in front of her face. I didn't say a word. I just pressed play on the video I had recorded just minutes prior. As she watched herself on the screen, her crying stopped instantly. Her mouth fell open, and a look of absolute crushing defeat settled over her features. She realized in that exact moment that there was no way out. There was no story she could construct, no web of lies she could spin to save herself. I had her completely trapped. The sight of her own betrayal playing out on that tiny glowing screen completely broke whatever resistance Chloe had left. The desperate, frantic excuses died instantly on her lips. She let go of the duvet, her hands dropping heavily into her lap, and stared at the floor as a fresh wave of silent, heavy tears pooled in her eyes and slipped down her cheeks. The absolute certainty of her exposure hung in the air like toxic fog. She knew, and I knew, that the woman she pretended to be was gone forever. There was no recovering from this. There was no marriage counseling, no long, tearful conversations on the couch, and no sweeping this under the rug. "I want you out of this house," I said, my voice shockingly steady, dropping into a cold, transactional register. I didn't want to scream anymore. Screaming required energy, and right now I felt like a hollow shell, emptied of everything that made me human. "I don't care where you go. Go to a hotel, go to Justin's, go to your mother's. I don't care. But you are not sleeping under this roof tonight." "Mark, please, it's past 9 o'clock, she whispered, her voice barely audible, trying to appeal to whatever shred of chivalry she thought I had left. "Where am I supposed to go?" "I do not care," I repeated, emphasizing every single syllable. "You have 15 minutes to pack a bag with whatever you need for the week." "If you are still in this house when that timer goes off, I will take every single piece of clothing you own, throw it out onto the front lawn, and turn on the lawn sprinklers. Move, now." The sheer, venomous finality in my tone must have finally penetrated her panic. She scrambled out of bed, grabbing a random pair of sweatpants and a hoodie from the floor, throwing them on with trembling hands. She avoided looking at me entirely, treating me like a ghost inhabiting the room. She dragged a small carry-on suitcase out from the back of the closet, the same suitcase we had used for our anniversary trip to Maui just 10 months ago,
and began shoving clothes into it blindly. Jeans, shirts, undergarments, shoes, whatever her hands touched, she threw inside in a chaotic, unorganized heap. I stood by the bedroom door, acting as a silent, unmoving sentry, watching her dismantle her presence in our room. Every slam of a dresser drawer, every zip of a bag, felt like a small, sharp chisel chipping away at the foundation of my past. 10 years of shared history, of building a home, of planning a future with children, all reduced to a woman frantically packing a suitcase in the middle of the night because she couldn't keep her hands off my best friend. When she finished, she zipped the bag shut with a loud, aggressive rip of the zipper. She picked up her purse and her phone from the nightstand, finally looking up to meet my gaze. Her eyes were red, puffy, and filled with a complex mixture of guilt, resentment, and profound fear. "This isn't just on me, Mark," she said, her voice suddenly hardening, an ugly defense mechanism kicking in as she tried to shift even a fraction of the blame onto my shoulders. "You were never here. You were always working, always prioritizing your logistics hub, always choosing your career over me. I was lonely. I was sitting in this giant, empty house completely by myself for months." I let out a short, bitter laugh that sounded entirely hollow. The audacity of her statement was almost breathtaking. "I was working 60 hours a week to pay the mortgage on this giant house, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping an octave, razor sharp. "I was working to build a life for us, to save money for the family you said you wanted. And while I was out breaking my back, you were in my bed with the man I brought into this house to help. Do not dare try to make your disgusting lack of loyalty my fault. You chose this. You pulled him into this bed. Now get out." She flinched as if I had struck her. She didn't say another word. She dragged her suitcase past me, her shoulder brushing against mine for a brief, agonizing second, leaving behind a faint trace of her perfume. I followed her down the stairs, watching her heels click against the hardwood floor until she reached the front entryway. She opened the front door, stepped out onto the dark porch, and closed it behind her. A minute later, the headlights of her SUV illuminated the front windows as she backed out of the driveway, disappearing into the suburban night. The moment the sound of her engine faded into the distance, the eerie silence of the empty house crashed down on me with the weight of a physical blow. The adrenaline that had been keeping me upright, keeping my voice steady and my mind sharp, evaporated instantly. My knees buckled. I sank down onto the bottom step of the staircase, burying my face in my hands, and I finally broke. I wept. I cried with a violent, chest-heaving agony that I didn't know the human body was capable of producing. It wasn't just tears, it was a visceral, guttural mourning for the life I had just lost. I cried for the betrayal of the woman I loved, and I cried for the betrayal of the man I called my brother. The double deception felt like an absolute, total annihilation of my reality. Who could I trust if the two pillars of my existence could look me in the eye, smile, eat dinner with me, and then turn around and do this? Every memory from the past 3 months was retroactively poisoned. Every morning run they took, every shared laugh at the kitchen island, every time Chloe told me to work late and not worry, it all took on a sinister, calculated meaning. They had been mocking me. They had been treating like a fool in my own home. I don't know how long I sat on that bottom step, drowning in my own despair. Eventually, the tears ran dry, leaving my throat raw and my chest aching. The initial wave of sorrow began to morph back into that cold, calculating anger. I realized I couldn't just sit here and let them control the narrative. In the world of modern breakups, the person who controls the story wins. And I knew Chloe and Justin would immediately go into damage control. They would tell our mutual friends a watered-down version, or worse, they would paint me as the distant, emotionally unavailable husband who drove his lonely wife into a mistake. I stood up, wiping my face with the back of my hand. My mind was completely clear now. driven by a dark, relentless urge for total exposure. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of straight whiskey, and sat down at the island with my phone. First, I opened my laptop and logged into our shared cellular account. I pulled up the detailed call and text logs for Chloe's number over the past 3 months. The sheer volume of data was staggering. Hundreds of text messages exchanged between her and Justin during the hours I was at work. Dozens of late-night phone calls while I was sleeping in hotel rooms across the Midwest. The digital footprint of their affair was massive, an undeniable roadmap of their deception. I downloaded the entire spreadsheet, saving it to a secure drive. Next, I opened my phone and looked at the video I had recorded upstairs. My stomach turned just looking at the thumbnail, but I forced myself to tap on it. I cropped the video carefully, ensuring it was a short 10-second clip that showed their faces with absolute unmistakable clarity, leaving no room for interpretation or denial, while keeping it decent enough to not violate any platform terms. I sat there, the amber liquid in my glass catching the kitchen light, realizing that I held the nuclear codes to their reputations. All our mutual friends, our families, Justin's potential future employers, everyone who thought they were good, decent people would see them for exactly what they were. I felt a sinister sense of satisfaction creeping into my chest. They wanted to play games behind my back? Fine, we were going to play by my rules now. I opened our main group chat, a thread containing 12 of our closest friends from college and our neighborhood, the core social circle we had spent years building. My thumb hovered over the media attachment button. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a manic rhythm of anticipation and dread. Once I pressed send, there was no going back. The bomb would detonate, and the fallout would destroy everything in its path. I stared at the group chat screen, my thumb hovering less than a millimeter above the glass. The names of our friends blinked back at me, people we had gone to college with, couples we hosted for football Sundays, the guys I went golfing with every weekend. If I pushed that button, their perception of our entire lives would shatter in an instant. I took a slow, deep breath, draining the rest of the whiskey from my glass, letting the burn anchor me to the room. I didn't hesitate anymore. I'd attached the video clip along with a single, brutally simple sentence. Caught Chloe and Justin in our bed tonight. Wedding is off. Friendship is over. Please don't call me. I pressed send. For about 30 seconds, the chat was dead silent. Then the ellipsis bubbles started appearing, flashing frantically as multiple people tried typing at the same time. My phone began to vibrate violently in my hand, a relentless barrage of notifications, text messages, and incoming calls. The first call was from Dave, my college roommate and another close friend of Justin's. I didn't answer. I just watched the notifications roll across the top of my screen. Oh my God, Mark, tell me this is a joke. What the hell is wrong with them? Are you okay? Where are you? The explosion was immediate and total. Within an hour, the digital fallout had spilled out of the group chat and into our wider social circle. I didn't have to say another word. The video spoke for itself, an undeniable, catastrophic proof that completely eliminated any chance of Justin or Chloe spinning the story. I learned later that night from a mutual friend that Dave had immediately called Justin, screaming at him, telling him he was dead to the entire group and to never show his face around any of us again. Justin had apparently panicked, deactivated all his social media accounts, and packed his car to drive back to his parents' house in Ohio that very night, completely humiliated and cast out by every friend he had in the state. But I wasn't done. The cold, calculating energy that had taken over my mind was demanding absolute closure. I opened my laptop again and drafted a blind copy email to Chloe's parents. They were traditional, old-school Midwestern folks who had always treated me like a son and who prided themselves on their daughter's perfect life. I didn't send them the video. I couldn't bring myself to be that cruel to them, but I attached a screenshot of the text logs and a brief, respectful note explaining exactly why their daughter was no longer welcome in my home and that I would be filing for divorce first thing Monday morning. I wanted them to hear the truth from me before Chloe could arrive on their doorstep with a heavily sanitized version of the truth. By 3 o'clock in the morning, the digital storm had quieted down, leaving me alone in the absolute stillness of the house. The initial high of the revenge faded, replaced by a deep, exhausting emptiness. I walked back up the stairs, avoiding looking at our bedroom door, and went into the guest room down the hall. I lay down on the mattress, staring up at the dark ceiling, listening to the ambient sounds of the suburban night. I didn't sleep a single wink. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of them through the crack in the door flashed behind my eyelids, a phantom pain that made my chest tighten until I couldn't breathe. The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings, packing boxes, and forced numbness. I hired an aggressive, no-nonsense divorce attorney who used the evidence I gathered to completely dismantle Chloe's leverage. Illinois is technically a no-fault divorce state, but when faced with the absolute certainty of public exposure and the digital trail of her infidelity, Chloe's lawyer advised her to settle quickly and quietly. She didn't fight me on the house. She didn't fight me on the savings. She just wanted it to be over. Her reputation so thoroughly damaged in our town that she couldn't walk into a local grocery store without feeling the weight of people's stares. She ended up renting a tiny, anonymous apartment closer to the city, completely isolated from the community we had spent a decade building. The house sold quickly. The day I signed the final closing papers, I went back to the property one last time to make sure I hadn't left anything behind. I walked through the empty rooms, the hardwood floors echoing with every step I took. The living room where Justin used to sit, the kitchen island where they shared their secret laughs, the master bedroom that had been the epicenter of my destruction. It was all just empty space now, stripped of the furniture, the photos, and the warmth. It was strange how a place that once held so much of my identity could suddenly feel like a museum of a life belonging to someone else. I walked out onto the front porch, locking the door behind me for the very last time, and dropped the keys into the lockbox for the new owners. I walked down the steps to my car, feeling a sudden, unexpected lightness in my chest. The betrayal had changed me, hardening a part of my soul that used to be soft and trusting. But as I started the engine and pulled away from the curb, I realized something important. They had ruined my past, and they had stolen my present, but they didn't have the power to destroy my future. That part belonged entirely to me.